Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Rabbi Walker, and delighted to tell you that we have won the victory. The battle has been won, and the Codist is back in print. This story of a biblical thriller taking you to Satan's last stand, his last way in trying to wipe out the Jewish people through the weaponization of DNA. It's an amazing story. It happens to have a tremendous amount of truth in it, a lot of biblical truth, but it's one of the most entertaining reads out there. 5-star reviews across the board, and also the release of the new book, The 7 Laws of Abundant Living, Lessons Learned from the Tree of Life. If you go to the Igniting a Nation Facebook page, we are promoting this as a contest. If you will just share the picture of these two books and post that you shared it, you'll have an opportunity to enter a drawing to win a copy of both these books. We'll have a drawing on February 20th, and you too can be a part of that. Go to Igniting a Nation on Facebook and look for this promotion. I'm very excited this morning because today is the release day of a brand new book by Eryn Lynum called 936 Pennies, Discovering the Joy of Intentional Parenting. Eryn lives in northern Colorado with her husband Grayson and 3 boys, where they spend their time hiking, camping, and exploring the Rocky Mountains. Her work and her passion is to come alongside of authors and help them market the message God has laid on their hearts. She loves to travel and share at conferences, churches, and writers' groups, but every opportunity she gets, she's out exploring God's creation with her family. Eryn Lynum, welcome to Revealing the Truth, and congratulations on the release of your new book, 936 Pennies.
Thank you. Thank you for having me this morning.
Well, you're very welcome. Eryn, a lot of times we look at a book about intentional parenting, and we have to ask ourselves the question, were we intentionally parented? When we go back to little Eryn and little Eryn's upbringing, can you reflect back now that you have a benchmark? Because this 936 Pennies is the story about benchmarking. It's a story about intentional parenting. It's a story about the passages of time and milestones and markers. Did you have those kind of milestones and markers in your upbringing?
I did. I'm extremely fortunate to have grown up in a wonderful, wonderful family. I have a brother and a sister, both older than I am. And my parents, they did things differently. They were, especially now that I'm a parent looking back, I can see that they were so rooted in their values as parents. One thing they never did was they never made us the center of their life. Christ and their marriage was the center of their life, and they brought us into that. And this book, writing the book, it caused me to look back and realize so many things my parents did with intentionality in their raising of me and my siblings and the time that they spent with us. So yeah, definitely.
Give me an example of what that means. I mean, we hear intentionality. I think we all know that we need to be intentional. In reality, we're procrastinators, slackers, goal setters, especially this time of year. New Year's resolutions, I always say they go in one year and out the other. We try to be intentional, but we don't have in ourselves. We don't have. We do have self-control, but we don't apply it.
Yes.
Oftentimes, we surround ourselves with so many tools of intentionality, we wind up becoming slave to the tools, and they no longer take on the meaning that they once had. When you look back at your parents' life, think of something for me and give me an example of what you considered to be intentional.
Yeah, definitely. They really made fun and laughter a priority in our home. And I can see now with small children of my own that is an intentional choice, that it doesn't come naturally when you're raising kids to have fun and make laughter a priority. And so a lot of things that they would do, my dad would start spontaneous water gun battles in the house, which my mom allowed. And kudos to her now looking back. So things like that. And that they would, like, I remember specific times that they would pack us in the car and they would say, hey, we're going to an antique store, which what 6-year-old child wants to go spend the day antique shopping? And then they would pull into a water park or the movie theater. And they were so intentional in being spontaneous with us and surprising us. And I feel like when a parent does that, it sends a signal to their child and says, you know what, this is going to be special. I thought this out. We're doing this. This is about us being together, and it's going to be special.
As you grew older, did you ever get to watch them interact in a way that said, you know, when I become a mom, when I become a wife, I want to be like that?
Oh, yeah. My mom and dad are a team. They have worked together for years in their businesses, but really in raising us, they were best. They still are to this day. They are best friends. And that left such a mark on me as a child. And then as I married and then started having children, that I want our family unit to be just, I want us to have fun together, because that's what I saw modeled in my own home. And I want my husband and myself to be a team in the decisions that we make and in the values that we set up for our family.
Do you think that your mother and father were raising children, or were they actually from the very start raising the next generation of mothers, the next generation of fathers, the next generation of husbands, and the next generation of wives?
Oh, definitely. That's a fantastic point. I think from the very beginning, they had eternity on their hearts and they saw the big picture. I can see that they would picture who they want us to be as adults, and they never pressured us in that, but they set up their value system as a family and they led us in that way.
You know, it's so interesting that when I hear these stories, I think about Little House on the Prairie, or some of the older shows where the family, because of the time, it was the 1800s or the early 1900s that these story settings were placed in, and here you're describing kind of a childhood that was built around the family as God-centered. Mom and dad putting themselves above the children, so God first, then husband or wife, then children. And by doing that, it seemed to make them intentional. Do you think that it was because of their priorities that it became easier for them, or that they had to work at making sure they kept a balance in those priorities?
I am sure that they had to work at keeping a balance in those priorities, especially as we got older. Because I hear that when kids are younger, it's more exhausting physically, and then as they get older, it becomes more exhausting mentally and emotionally. And I'm sure that they saw that need to come alongside of us as we got older, and just that I could see that it would become more difficult to not make us the focus as we got older. But I also see the benefits of it, that they kept Christ and their marriage at the center.
Where did you meet Grayson?
At Bible school in Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
Okay, so what was it that prompted you to want to go to Bible school?
That was actually, it was a small school focused on missionary work. And at the time, I believed that God was going to have me go into work overseas as a missionary. And so I lived about an hour from the school. And after visiting and seeing what their program was about, I was 100% in. And God, he's definitely changed. Well, he's definitely changed my heart. That's not what he had for me. But I know that he brought me there to meet Grayson.
So you two met freshman year?
Not quite. I was a freshman. He was actually already done with the program, but still living in the area at the time. So that's kind of how we connected. He would still visit school, and we met through a mutual friend there.
Now, when you two began this courtship, this dating, and you began talking about, you realized you were getting serious, and you decided that it's now time we talk about our upbringing, we introduce our families, and you start talking about what your vision is for marriage. You start talking about marriage, and when you talk about marriage, what it's going to be like, and that's often where the rub comes in. Is you're in love, you have this emotional bond, but then you start getting into some of the wants, desires, visions for the future, and then all of a sudden that's where maybe that's not the right person. But what made it about Grayson that got you to see that he was going to help you pattern a marriage and a life and parenting that would complement the way you were raised?
Sure. We were very blessed in that ever since we met, we had a very joint vision. And in the beginning, that vision was international missions. That's what we connected on. He had spent a lot of time serving overseas. I had also. And we actually met online technically. I was out of the country at the time, and he started reading some of what I was writing at the time about my travels and my heart for missions. And that's kind of how we connected. And so he encouraged me in that. And obviously, the Lord has, that was a decade ago. So the Lord has done so much in our lives since then. But over the past 10 years since we've met, God has been so gracious to help us to have this joint vision. And even when that vision started to change and transform and develop, my husband is a very good communicator, thankfully. I think he's a better communicator than I am. And that's been a blessing in our marriage because we sit down and we talk about these things all the time, our values, what's important to us. And so I feel like we're nearly always on the same page for what the Lord wants for our life and our family.
When you two got married, you started to have children pretty quickly.
Yes, we did.
And right now you have 3 boys. And what are their ages?
6, 4, and 2, and we are due any day with a little girl.
Well, congratulations. So
Thank you.
Number 4 on the way.
Yeah.
And so kind of take me, you've moved into a new community, and you've come to a new church.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, and you came to the, now you had been attending the church, and you were getting ready to dedicate your first child?
Second child.
Second child, okay. And you hadn't been to a baby dedication there before, or you had?
I don't believe I had been to one there before. No, we were still pretty new to the church.
Okay, so expectation would be, what denomination is this?
Non-denominational.
Non-denominational. So expectation would be they would call the couple up with the child, surround them with grandparents and other relatives to make sure that the other children that you have, if you have other children, are being watched while you can focus on this child in your arms. Right? So you and Grayson, and your son's name was?
Ellison. Ellison with an E.
Okay, Ellison. All right, and you get up there and kind of describe the feeling, the sensation, this walk. The last time you walked the aisle was your wedding.
Mm-hmm.
So now you're walking the aisle to dedicate a child that's a product of this marriage. Yeah. And you have, who are you relating to? Are you feeling like a Hannah? Are you feeling like a Sarah? Who are you feeling like as you're making this walk up the steps to present your child to be dedicated to the Lord?
Well, to be honest, I was a little frustrated. So I don't know who I would relate to. Ellison was 1.5 years. And so these baby dedication services are a lot easier when they're a newborn and they're sleeping in your arms. But it was past nap time and he was getting extremely unruly. So I was just praying, like, Lord, let this child hold it together as we get in front of everyone in our church. And I did have expectations because at our church, prior to that, when we still lived in Wisconsin, I worked for our children's pastor. And it was actually my job to prepare for the child dedication services. So I would order the gifts, the children's Bibles, the hymnal CDs we would give out, and I would organize that part of the service. So I was coming into this with some very preconceived notions of what it would be like. And I was so proud to be standing up there with my son and vowing before the Lord and before our family, our friends, our church family, to raise this child to the best of our ability to know and follow the Lord. But yeah, I think the tension was a little high that morning.
So you're up there, you're holding Ellison, and you describe this wailing, screaming child. And it makes me think that God must have a sense of humor.
Oh yeah, he does.
Because you've come out of the youth pastorate, you've managed this whole process for others, and now you're going to become the first time. This is the first child you've dedicated?
Second, we did dedicate our first child at our church back in Wisconsin.
So you played a part in all the elements to that. So you had a certain expectation that this was going to be just as moving and just as powerful, and maybe even more so because you weren't part of the management team. You were just going to receive.
Exactly, yeah.
What an exciting day.
It was, definitely.
And here in your arms is young, year and a half old, kind of old to be dedicated.
Yeah.
All right. Other families are having dedications that day, or just you?
Other families were there, probably 4 or 5 families, but they all had little babies. So Ellis was the oldest one up there.
Okay. And what was the order in which they were dedicating?
Oh, goodness. I can't even remember. All I remember is it took longer than I wanted it to, with Ellison screaming on my hip. So I'm guessing we were towards the last bit, but they kept all the families up there until the whole portion of the service was done.
Of course they did.
Yeah, exactly right.
Because in that perfect design, in order for God to do His perfect work, you have to be stripped completely bare of everything, every part of your agenda got thrown out the window because you're holding a screaming 1.5-year-old that you're trying to dedicate to the Lord in a new church for you, and a place that you hadn't experienced this baby dedication before, and your first child was dedicated, and that was probably absolutely picture perfect.
Oh yeah, he was a newborn. He just slept.
Ideal.
Yeah.
So everything you wanted it to be, everything you thought it was going to be, none of it happened. And then when you're expecting the Bible and the hymnal and all these little things, something happens so unusual, so different, that it strikes you almost with not just a physical heaviness, but with a spiritual heaviness. And what was presented to you?
Well, I have it, handed us this very jar with 936 pennies in it. And they gave one of these to each family. And our pastor explained, he said, in this jar, there are 936 pennies, and every penny represents 1 week that you have with your child between the time that they're born and the time that they turn 18. And then he challenged us, and he said, when you get home from church every Sunday, remove 1 penny to remind yourself that time is limited and that it is fleeting, and to challenge ourselves as parents to ask the deep questions of how are we investing every single week. Psalm 90:12 says, teach us to number our days that we may gain a heart of wisdom. And that is exactly what these pennies were meant to do in our hearts. But yeah, it was completely unexpected.
So your 936 pennies weighs a little bit, doesn't it?
It weighs very heavy on the hands and even heavier on the heart, yeah.
When you first received this, I can imagine it would bring me to tears.
Mhm.
I can imagine it would have touched me, because I was now so vulnerable with a screaming child, nothing going the way I wanted, and now I'm being given this charge that is so overwhelming, so weighty in its depth and its meaning, that you have 936 weeks, and for you, you've already got to start to take out what, 52,
72 with
72
Ellison, yeah.
with Ellison. You have to remove when you get home because that's the past. How did all this weigh on you?
Oh my goodness. I mean, when they first handed us the penny jars, it was kind of this jolt because I came from that place where, I'm frustrated with my child and the situation. It wasn't rolling out how I expected. And then they hand us this jar that completely changes our perspective on time and on parenting and just how we view the story of this child's life that God has given us. So it was like it was a jolt. And then when we got home and I did the math and I realized 72 weeks were already spent, I could not start counting. It took me 2 weeks to bring that jar inside and to begin counting the pennies. And it actually took, because my thing was, where do I put these pennies? Do I put them in a jar and grab a cup of coffee later? So I set up a second jar next to it, an empty jar. And this is now where we put our pennies every week so that as one jar is running out, we're not overwhelmed by the loss of time or the mourning of time passing, but rather we see the other jar building up. And that's our reminder that we are building into a legacy and the eternity of this child.
A visual legacy being built right before your eyes. And the legacy is by reducing, not by adding to.
Mm-hmm.
What's so interesting in this, and we're going to go to break right after I make this statement, is that is the way that God works, is He removes the earthly parts of us to replace them with the spiritual parts of us. And when you're taking that penny out, you know that God has filled that space.
Yes.
You don't have to replace it. He's taken care of it. And when you're done, you won't have an empty jar, you have a full child.
Exactly.
And that is the message of 936 pennies, discovering the joy of intentional parenting. There's so much more to this story, but we've got to go to break. When we come back, we'll join Eryn Lynum on the release day of this great book, 936 Pennies, Discovering the Joy of Intentional Parenting. We'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not exist. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're excited to share today's release of 936 Pennies, Discovering the Joy of Intentional Parenting, written by Eryn Lynum. Eryn, welcome back to the program. Okay, Eryn, I don't think we have audio on you. All right, we lost your audio somehow. Yeah, no, we have no audio on you whatsoever. To unplug your headphones back in. There you go.
How about now? Do you hear me?
We have audio on you now.
Okay,
there
good.
You go. Okay, so welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
All right, glad to have you. When we went to break, Jason, our executive producer, and myself always talk about the subject and how interesting this is, how brilliant an idea this pastor has come up with. But I can imagine how many times reaching in that jar and taking out that penny and realizing that causes you to review the events of the prior week that penny represented, that we might have a tendency towards going to the negative. We might have a tendency to where we didn't measure up, where we should have done, where we, when we lost our cool, when we said the wrong thing, when we missed an opportunity. Was that one of the reasons why you wrote the book, was that as you experienced the removal of pennies, you were also wrestling with the good, the bad, and the ugly, all of that, and how to stay the course to accomplish what this was intended to do. Your pastor didn't have an intention to give you a 936 reminders of what a bad job you're doing as a parent.
Definitely not.
All right. So walk me through your thought process, because you didn't write the book. You didn't come home from that and say, boy, this will make a great book. Okay.
No.
Give me the genesis of the book and what your thinking was and why you wanted to share this story and why you think this is such, and I happen to agree, such a tremendous opportunity for us to number our days with our children.
Definitely. Well, when we began counting out the pennies, I was blogging at the time, a little bit, just here and there, posting blog posts once in a while, and I didn't really have any following. I'd always enjoyed writing, but I never saw myself as a writer. But we had this jar, and it was changing how we saw things as parents. And so I wrote a little blog post about being given the penny jar and what happened at the child dedication service and how this was challenging us. And I hit publish, and the next day there were 10,000 hits on my website. And I thought it was broken. Like, okay, there's something wrong here. But then within 2 months, we had over 1 million views on that post. And I would come again and again to my computer every morning and read the comments and the personal emails that were sent to me of how this was impacting parents. And that's when God started nudging our hearts, my husband and my heart, and we started getting the idea for a book. And we had always said, it'd be neat one day to write a book. I think a lot of people say that. But God kept laying this penny jar and its message on our hearts. And I kept saying, this is terrible timing, because besides having a 3-year-old and 1-year-old, I was newly pregnant with our third son. And I thought, when am I going to have time to write a book? And who am I to write a book on parenting, nonetheless? And I think looking back now, it was about 3 years in the process of writing to today on release. Some of it was selfish, because I needed something like this book writing journey to keep me accountable in my motherhood and in my marriage and in my faith. And I say that, and it's true, writing about parenthood is terrifying, because as I worked through these chapters, and it was a 3-year experience, my children changed dramatically over that time. I was forced to come face to face with my deepest fears and insecurities, the biggest questions, grief. So many of these things that we as parents face every single day. And I'd say, okay, what am I going to write about this that could inspire and come alongside of a fellow parent? And God just brought me to my knees time and time again. And he brought me to the scriptures like I had never experienced before, even being in Bible school and being raised in the church, because I needed them. I needed his word, and he was so gracious to meet me there. And so many of those scriptures now are throughout the book.
As you were writing the book and as you're going through the process of taking these pennies out, was this kind of a ceremonial thing that you and Grayson got together and reach into the jar and kind of hold the penny and reflect together? Or was it more just something that you did every Monday morning at 8 o'clock and that was your routine? How did you weave that into your marriage?
That's a really good question. I'm actually usually the one who moves the penny over, and oftentimes I put it off. I talk about that in the book too, and it's not so much forgetfulness or laziness. It's a heavy task to do. Grayson, I would not have written this book without him. So much of him and his heart went into this process. He was the one who told me I could do it. He's the one who made it happen and watched the boys. And he is so much of this book and this message. But I think that us being intentional as a family, like all of our penny jars are up on the mantle, and sometimes I recount them. Sometimes I just get them out and recount them as that reminder of the time that we have invested. And he'll sit there next to me and we look at them. And I think that's the stark reminder when we see like the whole of what we've already invested in each child. And like I said earlier before the break, so many of our conversations are about our family values. And like just this week has been a little crazy with book launch, and our baby is due any day. And we realized that it was taking a toll on our kids and that they were overly emotional and just having a really hard time. And so we went out to coffee together, Grace and me, and we just talked about it. How can we meet our children where they are right now without making them the center of the universe, but reminding them, like, you are important to us. And yes, we're busy and we have a lot going on, but that doesn't mean that you are forgotten. And just having those conversations together, I feel like penny counting for us is a daily conversation.
I think it's an absolutely picture perfect method and system of accountability that, you know, you kind of think about the bad penny. There's weeks where you have to reflect negatively. Missed window of opportunity. As I look back, I can see where it's a lot of self-reflection as a mother, self-reflection as a father, but also what memory will I attach to it? By the end of this, you have a jar of 936 pennies and an empty jar. And now you have a child who is 18, and you're handing them your record. It's not the typical picture book. It's not the typical journal. It is a record of numbering their days, because then comes a charge. Okay? You now, your next 18 years are your formative years into adulthood. As you begin to graduate high school, move on to college, you know, maybe there's the follow-on for what do we do, right? Not just in this intentional parenting, but in charging and how we do this. Do you do all 3 children on the same day, or do you do them on different days?
I move the pennies over for each child on the same day. And it's a few minutes of reflection and just thinking through that past week. And it causes us to ask those questions. You know, how did we invest in their legacy this week? Did we spend time outside? Did we invite laughter into our home? What do I need to ask an apology for? So it's exactly that. But yeah, I do them on the same day.
And are the children present when you do them, or do you do them in private?
Usually after they go to bed, actually.
Okay.
So it just gives me a little more head and heart space.
When you and Grayson talk about what are some of the changes that you have made in your marriage and your parenting because of being driven to the penny?
Sure. There have been a lot of them. Shortly after I started writing the book, I'd probably been writing it for about 6 months. We were about to have our 3rd son. And so we took a trip, just the 2 of us, Grayson and me. And that trip was it was a vision trip. It was about 3 days. And we took a drive one day and we started to think and talk through, what are our values as a family? And I believe this was all driven by this new perspective that we had gained about our limited time to raise our kids. And that day on that drive, we wrote a list of things we wanted to see in our family, things that were important to us, things we wanted to be central to our home, to our unit. And that changed the course of our life. We actually moved away from Missouri and to Colorado because of that list. We chose to homeschool because of that list. It really, because we looked at that list of values, and we looked at our current life and things weren't matching up. And so in this view of we have 936 weeks, we can't waste another one. Not that we were wasting them, but we wanted to be more intentional with them, and that required change in our life, in our marriage and family.
So take me on a quick journey through the book. You share the story of how this evolved, but then you get into the chapters of counting time, amplifying time, slowing time, speaking of time, and time becomes a central theme of the whole 936 Pennies experience. It's tied to time, right? And what we do with that time, what we do with that time with the Lord, what we do with that time with our children, what we do with that time, it really does open up the door to an evaluation that, although it was intended to be 18 years with this child, it really becomes much more encompassing, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. It changes your whole life, not just your parenting.
And so when you laid out the book, kind of walk me through how you laid it out, and also your website you offer at erynlynum.com, a downloadable, printable Words of Life packet, which are words of encouragement, passages from the book, which are kind of reminders, memes, quote cards that you provide for people to subscribe to your blog and keep up with this, because it's your journey, and you've invited 100 million people to come on the journey with you and then share a part of their journey, and you do that through the book. So
exactly.
Tell me how, because time is limited, days are numbered, how do you approach time with the book?
So the different sections are each focused on something that God taught me over this process. And like you said, they're all centralized around our perspective on time. So the first section, counting time, it introduces the penny jars and this whole new way to view 18 years, 936 weeks, this visual reminder. And then it starts getting into different ways we can implement how we view time. And so there's amplifying time, and that's all about spending time in nature together as a family. And I go into my own struggle with that, because I was not always one who enjoyed spending time outdoors until I saw how it made my children come alive and how it connected them with their creator. And I talk about in that section the importance of laughter in a home and how we can make time bigger through these avenues. And slowing time is all about saying no to the rush of society and even to productivity in the name of connecting with our children and as a family. There's also a perspective on time is another section of the book. That was the most difficult section to write. I still cry anytime I read through it, because it's the fact there's a chapter in there called the shattered jar.
Right.
And it's the fact that none of us are guaranteed 936 weeks. I have a shattered jar, and I share that story in the book. And so that was a difficult but a very necessary piece of this message. So yeah, each of these different sections, speaking of time, is all about how we can make time fuller by the words that we say to our children, and how even when we as parents feel so tired and so depleted by the end of the day that we feel like there is nothing left intentional within us to give, we can speak a word to our child that will lift them out of a pit, that will encourage their hearts for years to come. And the words that we use are so powerful. And that's where that Words of Life packet came out of, because honestly, that's something that God really laid on my heart for this book, is the words that we use throughout these 936 weeks. So there's 10 different sections in the book dealing with ways we view time, and it ends on timeless. And that is the fact that it's a legacy that we are building, and that even if your jar is half spent, even if your jar is fully spent, that doesn't mean parenting is over. And that it just brings everything into this conclusion of, if you're at the beginning of this journey, you're building a legacy today, right now. Don't be overwhelmed by 936. Focus on today. And if you're at the end of this journey and preparing your child to go off to college or to move away, is there anything you need to ask forgiveness for? And what are you going to leave them with as they leave home? And it's this truth of God is bigger than these jars. You know, he gives us this view of time and perspective, but he's not confined by time. He sees our story, he sees our child's story, and he sees how those stories fit into his greater narrative. He just gives us this visual to help us along the way in the journey.
You know, I'm sitting here thinking about as the days pass, my daughter's 28, I'm in my mid-60s, even thinking of having a jar that I add a penny to now every week that I have with her, to remind myself, and maybe start the week out by dropping a penny in and making sure that I stay connected, that I'm work on my listening skills, that I'm not always trying to solve her problems, or ways to be a better parent to an adult child, because the role never changed. She's not my best friend. She's my daughter. I'm her dad. And she comes to me for daddy things, the big problems, the day-to-day. She has the foundation. That was the parenting days. The foundation was laid. But we're very close, but I'm not a subscriber that my kids are my best friends. Even my mother, who's 91, and I've talked to her every Sunday for the same time every Sunday for over 50 years. She's not my best friend. She's my mother. We've maintained, so she'll say mother things and I'll say son things, and the dynamic maintains, and we keep that relationship going. I can imagine how full that jar would be if once we emptied it and then we started the next season of intentionality, definitely. Of the next season of now guiding them through life that we took the 936 weeks to prepare them for. You've done an outstanding job, because there is the tendency to look at and evaluate to see, what did I do wrong? What didn't I do? What should I have done? Because we hold ourselves to a standard that isn't the standard that God gives us. He gives us this measure. Did you aggravate your children? Did you antagonize your children this week? Okay, if you did, then stop it. You know, you can say that to your husband. You can say that to your, listen, hey, you know, you and I got on Ellison's case an awful lot this week. You know, maybe we need to find a better way of communicating. And it makes it so that the good can endure, but the not so good has a life, and that life, the longest it can endure is 7 days. Because if you take control, the bad behavior, the lazy parenting, the TV parenting, the iPad parenting, the Xbox parenting, can only last a week because you become accountable. And so I think it is brilliant I think it's a great way to take what your pastor invested in you and bring it to a fullness of life that says that not just intentional parenting, but how do we look at time? How do we look at relationships? How do we apply these principles, whether or not it's in intentional parenting, or can it be applied to 936 pennies for my job, for my friends, for me being a son? How do I treat my mother at 91 years old? So many things to challenge us to pay attention to being intentional. Eryn Lynum, we wish you nothing but great success with 936 pennies, discovering the joy of intentional parenting, but really it's discovering the joy of intentionality through parenting.
Yeah.
And this is the springboard toward a system that kind of holds you accountable, that your breaking of habits, it doesn't really allow a habit to form because you're taking accountability. If you really do it, if you really follow it, and you really deal with time in the way God intended it to be dealt with, to teach us to number our days. Eryn Lynum, thank you so much for being with us here on Revealing the Truth. You can visit ignitinganation.com, scroll down to today's date, click on 936 pennies, and get it. Get a copy of it for you. Get a copy of it for your grown children, grandparents. You have an opportunity to 936 pennies, discovering the joy of intentional grandparenting. You can do all kinds of things in all kinds of ways in how you interact with your family, and it's all in this book. Eryn, thank you so much for being with us, and we say may God bless you abundantly.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
All right, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.